Is Canada quietly cutting ties with the US? Nuclear submarines, radar systems, and a chilling message from Ottawa: $60 billion in submarines, $6 billion in radar. A $19 billion F-35 deal on the edge of collapse. One of America's closest allies is quietly stepping out of its shadow. A firm message from Ottawa. The US-Canada relationship is deeply fractured. But this time, it's not about tariffs or immigration policies. It's about nuclear submarines, long-range radar systems, and a total rethinking of national defense strategy without relying on the United States. Canada's new Prime Minister, Mark Carney, a former governor of the Bank of England, declared, "We cannot and should not entrust our national defense to anyone else." This statement wasn't meant to provoke. It was a clear, calculated signal to Washington, at a time when trust between the two countries is at its lowest in decades. Nuclear submarines not made in USA. Earlier this month, the French nuclear-powered submarine FS Tourville docked in Halifax, Nova Scotia, just 300 miles from the US border. But this wasn't a diplomatic visit. It was a live demonstration of France's latest naval technology for Canadian defense officials. Canada is now preparing to replace its aging submarine fleet in a modernization plan worth $60 billion Canadian dollars, roughly 42 billion USD. They plan to acquire between 6 and 12 nuclear-powered submarines, specifically for long-duration operations in the Arctic, where competition for control is intensifying. In the past, major arms deals like this almost always went to American companies. This time, France is leading. Backed by its Barracuda-class submarine program and a strengthening defense partnership with Ottawa, long-range radar. Choosing Australia over the US. Shortly after, Canada announced a major investment, $6 billion Canadian dollars, into the Journe radar system, developed in Australia. Journe is an over-the-horizon radar capable of detecting aircraft and ships up to 3,000 kilometers away by bouncing radio waves off the ionosphere, covering the vast Arctic region in real time. What's striking is this. Canada bypassed all the US defense giants. No Lockheed Martin, no Raytheon, no Northrop Grumman. Why? Because Canada no longer trusts American defense consistency. The Arctic is too critical to leave in the hands of uncertain alliances. Canada wants sovereign surveillance, free of foreign pressure, even from its southern neighbor. F-35 deal under review. Then came the bombshell. Canada is now reconsidering its $19 billion contract to buy 88 F-35 fighter jets from the US. The agreement was signed in 2023, and Canada has only paid for the first 16 units so far. But now, the government is reviewing the entire deal and may switch suppliers. Defense Minister Bill Blair called it a necessary strategic decision to protect Canadian sovereignty. But analysts are calling it what it really is: the strongest warning Canada has sent to the Pentagon in over 30 years. NATO allies are watching, and this shift isn't isolated. Just weeks ago, Portugal canceled its own F-35 procurement, citing unpredictable US foreign policy as a key risk for NATO unity. Portuguese Defense Minister Nuno Melo made it clear, we must rethink our reliance on a partner whose positions change too quickly. And that's the heart of the issue. Can a unified defense system survive when its central pillar becomes volatile and erratic? A post-NORAD era? For decades, NORAD, the North American Aerospace Defense Command, was a symbol of unshakable trust between Canada and the US. But behind closed doors, Ottawa is quietly building alternative systems, from Australian radar to French submarines and more European tech contracts. Canada is not just diversifying suppliers, it's restructuring its entire defense ecosystem, piece by piece. This is not just procurement, it's a strategic realignment of historic proportions. Stay tuned to see how Europe, Asia, and Washington respond next.
In news coming in from the defense sector, Canada is reconsidering America-built F-35 purchase. This is big news. Remember, mulling over talks with the rival aircraft makers as well. The decisions come while there are clearly tensions between US and Canada.
Canada is facing a historic decision. Cancel the $13 billion USD F-35 contract and choose a European partner. So, what is driving this bold move by the country? Since 2017, when Donald Trump started implementing protectionist trade policies, tensions began to form. One of the biggest shocks was the US imposing tariffs on steel, aluminum, and agricultural products from Canada. These tariffs caused severe difficulties for Canada's industries. Specifically, Canada could not ignore the trade barriers introduced by the Trump administration, such as requirements on agricultural products or restrictions on steel exports. Furthermore, these decisions were not just economic losses, but also increased Canada's dependency on a single country, the US. This forced the Canadian government to ask a big question. Can we continue to rely on such an unfair partner when we could find other, more reliable partners?
Canada has reached an agreement to acquire a fleet of 88 new F-35 fighter jets. Defense Minister Anita Anand spoke about the $19 billion deal this past hour. She said it's the largest investment in the Royal Canadian Air Force in 30 years, and that this acquisition will create many economic benefits for Canada.
This is a turning point decision. Signed in 2023, the contract to purchase 88 F-35s from the US was a key part of Canada's strategy to modernize its air force. However, the recent trade tensions have forced Ottawa to reconsider this agreement. The $13 billion US DF-35 deal is not just a typical arms procurement, but also a symbol of the cooperation between the two nations. But in the current context, is it still reasonable for Canada to continue working with the US when Trump's tariffs and trade decisions are increasingly pressuring Canada's economy? With the F-35 primarily produced in the US, Canada faces a big question. Should they continue to depend on a country with such strong protectionist policies or seek alternative options from Europe? The US, of course, is not happy with this news. They have continuously emphasized the importance of defense cooperation between the two nations, especially with the F-35, which is the U.S. fifth-generation fighter jet. Washington reacted strongly, stating that Canada's decision to cancel the contract could damage the special relationship between the two nations. Canceling the F-35 deal not only affects the defense relationship between Canada and the U.S., but also has far-reaching effects on various industries and the Canadian public's reaction to U.S. trade policies. Specifically, this decision could alter the structure of Canada's defense, agricultural, and steel industries. The U.S. tariff policies, especially the tariffs on steel, aluminum, and agricultural products from Canada, have caused significant damage to these industries. Canada, especially provinces like Ontario and Quebec, relies heavily on steel and aluminum exports to the U.S. And Trump's decisions have put businesses in a difficult position. Canadian farmers have also been heavily impacted by the U.S. imposing tariffs on agricultural products like milk and beef. This policy has not only reduced profits in these industries, but also created economic instability in Canada, as businesses face rising costs and the loss of export markets. A large portion of the Canadian public has expressed support for shifting towards other partners, particularly in Europe. They believe that if the U.S. continues to impose unfair tariffs, seeking alternative partners is essential to ensure the nation's independence and sustainable economic growth. Canada not only wants to maintain its relationship with the U.S., but also wants to assert that they can stand on their own and do not need to depend on another country. Stay tuned and keep watching, because the upcoming developments will leave you unable to look away. Will Canada choose to change direction or continue to stay tied to the U.S.? Canada's surprising shift. Is Italy gradually replacing the U.S. in trade? Canada and Italy, two countries separated by thousands of kilometers, yet growing closer than ever. As Canada's trade relationship with the U.S. faces increasing challenges, Italy has unexpectedly emerged as a key partner, filling the gap left by the United States. But does this mean that Italy is gradually replacing the U.S. in trade with Canada? And what has driven this shift? Is Italy replacing the U.S. in trade with Canada? The United States has long been Canada's largest trading partner, but recent tariff policies have changed the landscape. As the U.S. imposed higher tariffs on Canadian imports, Ottawa was forced to explore alternative options to protect its economy. So why Italy? Italy is not Canada's largest trading partner, but it holds a crucial advantage: the European Union, EU. With Canada's Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement, CETA, with the EU, tariffs on many Italian products have been significantly reduced, creating a major competitive edge. This means that while U.S. goods face increasing tariffs, Italian products have a clear path to expand market share in Canada. Moreover, Italy specializes in industries that align with Canada's growing demands, such as food, wine, renewable energy, and advanced technology. Italy not only offers high-quality products, but also has a flexible trade system that meets Canada's evolving needs. Given all these factors, Canada is strategically adjusting its trade approach, strengthening ties with Italy to reduce its dependence on the U.S. Strong trade cooperation between Italy and Canada. When discussing trade between Italy and Canada, the food industry is impossible to overlook. Canada is one of the world's largest food markets, and Italy has long been renowned for its high-quality products, transparent sourcing, and strict production standards. Products such as wine, olive oil, pasta, cheese, cured meats, and rice are gaining increasing popularity in Canada, especially after CETA significantly reduced tariffs on these items. According to the latest trade data, Italy has now surpassed France to become Canada's third-largest food supplier, trailing only the US and Mexico. But what's even more interesting is the consumer trend in Canada. More and more Canadians are opting for high-quality European products over American alternatives. This shift provides Italy with a strong competitive advantage, particularly in the midst of trade tensions between the US and Canada. Beyond food, Italy is expanding into other sectors, such as food processing technology, high-end consumer goods, and industrial machinery exports. With continued growth in these industries, the trade relationship between Canada and Italy is becoming increasingly significant. Expanding cooperation beyond trade, Canada and Italy are forging deep partnerships in various key sectors, technology and manufacturing. Both Canada and Italy have high-tech development strategies aimed at boosting production capacity. In the electric vehicle and battery sector, the two nations are collaborating on research to reduce reliance on the US and China. Renewable energy. Both countries have strong clean energy policies, particularly in reducing fossil fuel dependence. Italy is a global leader in solar, wind, and hydrogen energy, while Canada holds vast natural resources. Cybersecurity and defense collaboration. In the digital age, cybersecurity has become a critical international concern. Canada and Italy are engaged in joint initiatives to strengthen information security, protect financial and technological infrastructures, and counter cyber attacks. Sustainable economic development beyond traditional economic sectors. Canada and Italy are working together to drive sustainability initiatives. After Donald Trump's protectionist policies and tariffs, Canada is looking to reduce its dependence on the U.S. Can this country really turn its back on the US and pivot toward partners like the EU and the UK? Canada and the US have long been close trading partners. Hundreds of billions of dollars in goods and services are exchanged each year. But under Donald Trump's protectionist policies, that relationship is being tested. High tariffs on steel and aluminum. 25% on steel, 10% on aluminum have severely impacted Canada's industries. Businesses struggle to export to the U.S. Production costs have risen and competitiveness has declined. These protectionist measures have significantly affected Canada's economy, forcing many industries, especially steel and aluminum production, to adapt to rising costs and reduced competitiveness in global markets. Although these policies have led to short-term GDP growth, with Canada's economy expanding by 4% to 7%, equivalent to over $200 billion, annually, the long-term challenges remain. Canada cannot afford to rely on an unstable trade relationship. Trade tensions aren't just limited to metals. The auto industry, dairy products, and even high-tech exports have been affected by U.S. policies, causing uncertainty among Canadian businesses. So, what's Canada's response? It's looking for new partners. The EU, with over 500 million consumers, and the UK, despite leaving the EU, are becoming more attractive trade destinations. Trade agreements like CETA, with the EU and a new post-Brexit deal with the UK are helping Canada diversify its export markets and reduce its reliance on the US. So, the big question remains: can Canada successfully break away from its dependence on the US? Or will economic reality keep it tied to its largest trading partner? But the question is, can Canada truly find a stronger economic alliance than the US? You might not have heard of CANZUK, but this promising project could help Canada build a new economic bloc with the UK, Australia, and New Zealand. Could CANZUK be Canada's future? What exactly is CANZUK? It's a concept for a union between Canada, the UK, Australia, and New Zealand, a free trade area with no tariffs and free movement of labor between them. With shared cultural, legal, and political systems, CANZUK offers Canada a chance to form a strong economic bloc while increasing geopolitical stability. But can CANZUK really replace the US? In reality, geography and the US market remain instrumental to Canada's economy. However, with breakthroughs in trade agreements with the EU, the UK, and CANZUK countries, Canada is diversifying its trade strategy. The CETA agreement with the EU has already opened doors for Canada, granting access to 500 million consumers with near-zero tariffs. Expanding exports to Europe, along with strengthening ties through CANZUK, could give Canada a more balanced trade portfolio. But make no mistake, Canada isn't abandoning the US. Instead, it's building strategic relationships to protect its economy from uncertainty. By forging stronger alliances with stable, economically powerful nations, Canada ensures sustainable growth and resilience against protectionist policies. Is CANZUK the future? And could this be the biggest trade shift for Canada since NAFTA? Trump's tariff reimposition. Does Canada have the golden opportunity to change the game? On March 12th, a decision was made that could reshape the North American economic landscape. Donald Trump reimposed a 25% tariff on steel and aluminum imports from Canada and Mexico. But does this decision open a new opportunity for Canada? Can the country seize this challenge to change the global energy game? The tariffs imposed by the US have heightened tensions between the three neighboring countries. Specifically, the 25% tariff on steel and aluminum imports from Canada not only affects Canada's manufacturing industry, but also has a significant impact on its national economy. However, instead of just reacting with simple countermeasures, Canada is opting for a bold and promising new strategy, shifting its liquefied natural gas, LNG, exports to the European market. With the steel and aluminum industries heavily impacted by US tariffs, Canada is not standing still. Instead, it is taking advantage of the opportunity to develop a new energy sector, one that promises to reduce its dependence on the US and increase its presence on the global stage. In a recent press conference, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said, "Europe is looking for alternative energy sources, and Canada can play an important role in reducing reliance on unstable suppliers." This statement reflects a clear strategy. Canada is not just focusing on the US market, but is actively seeking to build new partnerships in Europe. According to the International Energy Agency, IEA, Canada exported nearly 6 billion cubic meters of LNG in 2022. If projects like LNG Quebec are revived, that figure could double, putting Canada among the world's top LNG exporters. With expanded LNG export routes, Canada could not only change its economic situation, but also reposition itself as a strategic energy supplier for global partners. LNG is one of the strategic energy products that many countries are seeking, especially Europe, as it looks to reduce its dependence on Russian gas. And with abundant natural gas reserves and increasing LNG export capacity, Canada is well positioned to capitalize on this shift. EU chooses Canada's LNG, opportunity or economic risk. The European Union is looking to reduce its dependence on Russian gas, and Canada, with its abundant natural gas resources, is positioning itself as an important partner. However, switching to LNG imports from Canada comes with a high price tag. According to the International Energy Agency, IEA, shipping LNG from Canada to Europe could cost twice as much as importing from the US, with a transport time of 13 to 15 days compared to just 5 to 7 days from the US. Higher LNG costs from Canada will directly impact the EU economy. LNG prices could rise by 10 to 15%, leading to higher electricity and gas bills for millions of Europeans, especially low and middle-income households. Europe will have to weigh the long-term benefits of reducing dependence on Russia against the short-term financial burden of costly LNG. If energy prices continue to climb, EU governments may be forced to intervene, increasing spending on subsidy programs, or even adjusting fiscal policies to offset the economic impact. Canada's Foreign Minister Mélanie Joly stated, "Exporting LNG from Canada not only helps the EU reduce reliance on Russia, but also creates a sustainable partnership between Canada and Europe." However, the real question remains, can the EU afford to pay the price for a strategic shift away from Russia?